And we're live, or maybe the last 30 seconds of what I was doing is live. We're still figuring this stuff out. Welcome back to all the people that stopped in for our little teaser last Friday. Kind of excited about what we're going to do. I have never done this before. Not doing this session for a class or for a group of people is a little bit weird for me. But I've been through the material a couple times before, so we're going to see how this fits. We're calling this session one, the beginning of the SOFO, the Smart Operator Fundamentals Online. We're calling it Let's Start from the Very Beginning, because that's a very good place to start. Just wanted to, of course, go ahead and learn how to act. I am better at running this stuff now. So my name is Jamie Anderson again. I'm the President and Director of Training here at Rational Acoustics. Joining us in this, we'll have Chris Tanjuris and Michael Lawrence and Gavin Kane. These guys will all be helping with the online stream. Mike will be popping his head in. You've got an email address there. You've got my address, oddly enough, Jamie at Rational Acoustics. Don't use that. It takes a long time to get a response to that address. Looking at the next page, and I say that in all of my classes. You can get me at jamie@rationalacoustics.com, but the ones of you that have used that address have found that it takes a long time to get a response. The best address for you for Rational Acoustics is going to be support@rationalacoustics.com. Support@rationalacoustics.com is monitored by our support people, by Liz, the technical support manager, by Casey. When you have licensing problems, when you have loading problems, when you have any application problems, you find bugs, anything, that one address, support@rationalacoustics.com, is really your go-to address. When you have a brilliant idea for a new feature, support@rationalacoustics.com. I can't say that enough. So just remember that when you have comments and things like that, and you have questions, support@rationalacoustics.com is going to get that question answered. Training@rationalacoustics.com is monitored by Gavin and myself and a few other people. And sales, of course, if you're looking to buy anything. Those are three good email addresses for getting in touch with us because they hit lots of people. Okay, and this is the audience. I was just talking about Joshua. It's just a little weird talking to an empty room. So Joshua is representing you guys, and so I have somebody to talk to, guys, because this is kind of weird. Okay, so in this session, what are we doing in this session? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be doing a welcome to the Smart program. We'll talk about installing, versioning, help, the documents folder. We'll get a tour through the GUI, an idea of the layout of the program. We'll do some intros to some measurement concepts, some general concepts like single versus dual channel measurements, time domain versus frequency domain analysis. We'll talk about the mechanics of the FFT, because the FFT is really the engine that drives this analyzer. And then we'll do some getting started things, just starting up Smart and configuring it. We'll talk about the measurement setup that we're going to use for all of these SOFO sessions, just the basic layout. So if you're going to want to build something at home to kind of measure along or repeat what we're doing, we'll give you the basic layout. It's pretty simple. You can do it with a single channel or a dual channel interface. And we'll talk about the initial startup and configuration. Now note, this is what we're going to cover. Not necessarily in this order. Like I said in the previous thing, they're kind of all smashed together and interrelated, but we'll get ourselves through here. We're going to try to get through this. I do not know how long this is going to take. I have a feeling that it's going to be about an hour to hour 15 minutes given the content, but I've never presented it in this format or to Joshua, who could be a really demanding audience. So, please bear with me, and this will help us get to a point where I can get a better idea of what's a usable size nugget. You don't need to be a math whiz for this. We only need some basic math skills here. There is some really kind of cool if you like math, or frightening if you don't, math that underpins this with the FFT and Fourier transforms and all that. You don't need to do that. You guys are engineers. You've got other things that you're responsible for. But what we're going to be using throughout this whole thing is more conceptual math. You just need to understand the concepts behind what we're doing and how making changes, how these things are going to impact the way your measurements are going to come out. And so some basic concepts: time equals 1 over frequency, frequency equals 1 over time. That little bit of math is there throughout the a ton of stuff that we're going to do. If we're talking about 1 millisecond worth of time, 1 over 1 millisecond is 1 kilohertz. It's so 1,000 cycles per second. Anyway, that math is going to show its head all the time. Obviously, we're going to need to know about the sine wave. It's the basic building block of what we're dealing with, and also concepts like linear versus log, but really nothing math intense. This program is these sessions are really built to talk with a standard audio engineer with maybe high school math background. There's not going to be a math test on this. You're not going to need a calculator. Okay, so in the session, just an overview of the sessions that we're going to be doing. We covered this last week, but I want to cover it now as well. Is that we're going to try and do them 60 minutes in a chunk, Mondays and Wednesdays, 2 p.m. So right now, if you guys are tuning in live. On Fridays, we'll do miscellaneous applications. The first one we're going to do, this is going to be done by Chris Tenjuris, our product manager, but Chris is going to talk about Smart DI, because these sessions I'm going to teach, I'm going to do it on Smart 8, Smart 8.4 to be precise. And so the thing is that Chris is going to go over Smart DI, which is a version of Smart. It's sort of a cut down version, a simpler version. But a lot of people have it. So he's just going to talk about the differences between DI and the full version, and the implications of if you have Smart DI versus what I was talking about, how these things apply. So that's going to be the first session this Friday that Chris is going to do. Next week, we'll see what the application is. We're kind of making this up as we go along. During the live stream, as a lot of you know, if you're saying here, you can be asking questions on the live stream. We've got a few instructors on the line. In fact, what I hear is we have more than a few instructors on the line. We've got our German instructor, Michael. Hey, Michael. We've got a few different of our instructors.
Erica's here as well.
Erica's here, maker of Erica's Rule. And so the thing is that there are people that can answer your questions. At the end of this, we'll give you the PowerPoint. I'll ask on the PowerPoint is for your use. Do not use it publicly or disseminate it publicly. There's a little copyright notice down there, but it's there so that you can go through this stuff, so you'll have those notes for yourself. The sessions will be available for stream anytime after the initial session. Like materials will be ready for you. And what I'm guessing is that if I can get all this stuff in this one session in an hour and 15, we can probably get through the fundamentals class, at least the first 2 days of it, in 3, maybe 4 weeks. We'll see. We might grow this format and drop in other materials as well. And again, with all the other instructors we have out there, we're looking to get content being made by some of our other instructors as well, maybe in other languages. So who knows where this platform is going to go. So stay tuned. So let's start from the very beginning. It's a very nice place to start. Now, this is not my fault. This was as soon as I told Chris what the name of this session was going to be. That's what he gave me. I'm sure a lot of you know the reference. But that's the whole point. Is let's start looking at this as the basic fundamentals that drive this. So just talking about fundamentals, we're audio engineers. We're working in our medium is sound, and the sound waveform is just a complex waveform, amplitude versus time. What I'm doing is I'm varying the air pressure. I'm creating this complex wave. We've got a microphone over there. That microphone, that transducer is going to take that variation in pressure, turn it into a variation in voltage. That's going to head downstream, hit the A to D converter, and that's going to turn it into a variation in level, in digital level. And then when we play it back it goes the opposite direction. So what we're working in here, our medium for our art is sound waves. And so essentially what this analyzer is going to allow us to do is start taking apart those sound waves, and the systems, hopefully be able to analyze the systems that we're sending those sound waves through. Okay. So we'll start off with our friend Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier, a very fancy dresser. Now, what's kind of cool is I just found out about this a couple years ago, so that maybe it's not just found out about. But Fourier, did you know that on the Eiffel Tower, there's 72 names inscribed around the Eiffel Tower, and Fourier is one of them. In fact, the French inscribed, I think Coulomb is up there, Pascal. There's a bunch of I'm not sure if Pascal's up there, but somebody out there is probably checking right now what the 72 names that surround the different layers of the Eiffel Tower are. But Pascal's up there. Good for France for honoring their scientists and some artists. But what Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier, JBJ, said was that all complex waves, so this guy right here, is actually made up of a whole bunch of simple sine waves of just varying frequency and level. And that's what Fourier analysis is. And this is kind of the underpinnings of what we're doing. And when we describe a sine wave, it all comes down to all the sine wave is an oscillation. That's what we're dealing with. So an oscillation, it goes to full positive, it goes to full negative, and it just sits there and oscillates. So one of the things we'll end up talking about later on, and more importantly to other courses you might take, is this concept of wavelength. So if you take the speed of propagation of sound in an environment, and you take the period of the wave, so how long does it take to go a full oscillation, that describes the wavelength. And that's a very important thing to know about, because knowing the wavelength, the effective wavelength in the environment, will tell you about and how that sound is how those frequencies are going to interact, how different radiating sources or reflections are going to interact. So if you take a look at, say, a 100-cycle wave, so the period of a 100-cycle wave is 10 milliseconds. So frequency equals 1 over the period or the time. So the frequency of a 100-cycle wave is 10 milliseconds. In air, sound travels about 1 foot or 34 centimeters per millisecond. So a 100-cycle wave is about 3 meters long, about 10 feet long. Okay, the point that I'm making here, though, is that it actually doesn't take up a physical 10 feet of space. I don't need 10 feet to have 100 cycles. I can have a 100-cycle oscillation. An oscillation is a rate of oscillation. I can have that in my eardrum. If I needed 10 feet of space, my in-ear monitors could only go down to, 8K, 4K. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out there. What Fourier said was all these complex waves are built of a summation of sine waves. And a classic example of that is going to be our square wave. The square wave, and I'll go ahead and get myself out of the picture here. There we go. So you can see this better. But a square wave is built by taking a fundamental frequency and adding lower level harmonics to it. And so as I add this guy to this guy, I get this one, this guy gets this. And so that creates a square wave. If I create a square wave, though, what I'm going to be doing is creating those harmonics. So if I take a look at a square wave, but I look at it in frequency domain. So we're just looking at the same information, but now instead of amplitude versus time, what we're looking at is amplitude versus frequency. And so on the spectrum analyzer, the RTA view, you'll see a fundamental frequency, and then you'll see the odd harmonic. So this is level by frequency. This on the top is a log view of that. Below is a linear view. We're going to get into that more so on Wednesday when we're talking about views and things like that. But in this case, all three of these windows are the same information. When you look at it in frequency domain view, you see the frequency content of the signal. When you look at it in time domain view, you see the waveform. The thing is, though, that if I create this waveform, this squared off waveform, I'm creating these frequencies. This guy and that guy are the same thing. Here's a question. What's the easiest way to blow up a subwoofer? Well, the easiest way to blow up a subwoofer is put it in a club. Install it in a club. You guys all know that's true. But basically, I don't know if that helped going to my camera so I could talk to you. I'm getting used to this. Bear it with me. So the thing is that say you install a subwoofer in a club, you've got a whole chain of signal upstream. A lot of that gear gets overdriven. If you took and you squared off the signal, you clip the signal, you're going to create these high harmonics, because that when you clip and create that waveform, you're creating those high harmonics. If you take those high harmonics and then dump them into the amplifier for the subwoofer, and doesn't have a low pass filter to protect it, it's going to try and make that subwoofer mechanism repeat those high frequency oscillations, which it is not built for. It's built for lower frequency oscillations. It's built for efficiency of low frequency, loading low frequency into large environments. And so you'll sit there and it will turn into heat and it will burn stuff up, and you'll be splashing ferrofluid and burning through coils, and they'll be crying and whining. But basically, this just comes from when I create that waveform, I'm creating those frequencies. It's just two views of the same information. Anyway, I'm getting there. I'm figuring this thing out. Okay, so a mathematical transform for us is a very important tool for us, because it's going to allow us to take data in one format and look at it in a different format. So we can go from a Fourier transform. It's going to take us from time domain, so amplitude versus time, to amplitude versus frequency. It's going to give us the complex spectra of the signal. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is that you notice that it can the Fourier transform will take us from time domain, amplitude versus time, the waveform, to frequency domain. You notice that there's an arrow pointing backwards, because mathematically we can also run that same transform in the opposite direction. And that's going to become a very important tool for us when we're taking our measurements and doing some analysis here. I'm going to throw some letters at you. You don't necessarily need to know these things to be able to get by here, but it would be a good idea for you to understand these. The math itself, when Fourier came up with it, it was classic analog, I would say. Basically, the math of the Fourier math just says, give me the entire signal, I'll give you the frequency content. Well, what we're doing is we're taking chunks of the signal. So what we're doing is what's known as the DFT. Also, because we're running it on computers, we're not running it on the entire signal, positive to negative infinity in time. We're taking a chunk of the signal and we're running it through the math and getting the frequency content. But as soon as I take a discrete chunk, that DFT, that's going to have an impact on our data. And oddly enough, it's that same reciprocal bandwidth. The size of the chunk of time we take is going to impact the frequency resolution of our data. So a DFT is, we're going to take a chunk of a signal, not the entire signal, and then we'll run it through and get the frequency content. Now, most of you have probably heard the term FFT, fast Fourier transform. Well, there are certain chunk sizes of data that in computers just run a lot faster. And for those of us who build computer programs, that's pretty important, because we're always worried about using up processor cycles. So if I just took a random DFT, probably cost me more computer power. With the FFT, they are fast. And so the thing is that as soon as you take these set sizes of data, and when we say sizes, what we're talking about is, because it's digital audio, it's samples, right? And so when I say 16K FFT, that's 16,000 samples. So you know these numbers, 128. 256, 512, 1K, 2K, 4K, 8K, 16K. It's a power of 2. It's a doubling. It's 1-bit, 2-bit, 3-bit, 4-bit. And so if we take data sets that are exactly a power of 2 size, then those things calculate really quickly. And so FFTs are built into our operating system. This is math that's been around for pretty much as long as the computers have been around, because this is one of the tasks that the computers were built for, is doing this type of math. And so FFTs, you can call up FFTs in Excel, in Photoshop, and it's just a mathematical process that is hardwired into our operating systems. And so what you'll see propagating throughout all the analyzers out there and other programs is going to be the people calling up FFTs. You're going to hear me say something. I'm going to say a 16K FFT is 341 milliseconds long. It's time constant. It represents a 341 millisecond chunk of time. Where does that come from? Well, if I'm doing a 48K sample rate, so 48,000 samples per second, so one sample equals 1/48,000th of a second, or about 20 microseconds. So 16,000 samples at 48,000 samples per second ends up, if you do the math out, 341 milliseconds. So that's the FFT. And then the IFT, when we're talking about IFT or IFFT to be more precise, but people like to have three-letter acronyms, TLAs, not FLAs. But anyways, the IFT is just the inverse process. So where the FFT takes us from time domain to frequency domain, the IFT just takes us from frequency domain to time domain. Okay, so here we're going to be looking at FFTs a bunch later on in this course. But here we're just looking at, okay, we're changing the FFT parameters. Here you can see the time constant, the FFT size versus the time constant it represents. And like I said, 16K is a 341 millisecond time constant. If we were sampling at 44.1, it would be about 372 milliseconds. And I'm really sad that I know that off the top of my head, because I could be using that brain space for something else. But what we're looking at here in this is you're looking at a series of FFTs of progressively longer and longer time constants. So we're looking at a spectrum. So along the horizontal axis is frequency, along the vertical axis is level, and then we've just laid them out so that you can see as we go to a progressively longer and longer time constant, we get a finer and finer frequency resolution. Okay, so we'll step on from there. So let's talk about analyzers. So analyzers are really our tools for measuring the systems, right? They are not the answer. They're a way of helping us come up with the answer. They're a way of asking questions. And different measurements are good for asking different questions. So one of the things we want to do here is we want to, in the course of these sessions, is get you familiar with all the different measurements in Smaart. And a lot of stuff with Smaart and a lot of stuff with measurement is all about being able to look at data multiple different ways. Sometimes the issue you're looking for doesn't show up well in one view of the information, but transforming that information or looking at it a different way gives you an opportunity to figure out what that problem is. In the center of this screen, you see you've got a frequency response here and an impulse response here. That's two views of the exact same information. You see a comb filter here. A comb filter is caused by a second arrival, so you see a peak and a dip and a peak and a dip and a peak and a dip, peak at 2K, peak at 4K, peak at 6K. Anyway, so what you're seeing is a 2 kilohertz comb in my data. Well, a 2 kilohertz comb is caused by a reflection arriving at, like here's that math again, 1/2 kilohertz, which would be half a millisecond. Half a millisecond, if I look at time domain, I see an arrival, and then behind it, I see a second arrival a half millisecond later. It's just two views of the same information, but in one case I can say, oh, wait a minute, that problem is a reflection or a timing issue. And don't just jump onto the EQ and try and bash this curve into submission. Anyway, so one of the things we want to do with this class is to get you familiar with all the different measurement capabilities, the views of our data, all of that, and so get you familiar with it. I've been working with people for many, many years. I've actually been with Smaart since 1999, version 3. I've run into people that have been using it for almost as long, and yet all they use Smaart for is maybe the magnitude trace and the spectrum, the RTA. There's a lot more measurement capability in Smaart, and hopefully when we get done with this, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable using those things and coming up with new ways to use it. I want to put this out there. There's conceptually in our job, there's two basic measurement questions we're asking. What do we got? What's happening? So a classic of that is, how loud is the signal? What frequency is that? What time is the signal arriving right here? All of those questions. What is the frequency response of that system? These are a set of questions that we're asking all the time. But when we're using data and we're using an analyzer, there's also another sort of meta question that's on top of that. It is, what do we have relative? A lot of the questions that we're going to be asking as system engineers are what I call relept. You're going to get tired of hearing that phrase, but relept is response level, polarity, timing. Those are the elements that we need to pull out when we're asking questions about what's going on with the system. Those are one of the things that we use an analyzer to help us get an answer. And so the question is going to be, how do they differ? So it's not just what's the arrival of the sound out of that speaker. It's what's the arrival of the sound out of that speaker relative to this guy. What's the level of the high driver relative to the low driver? How loud is it here relative to there, front of the audience to back of the audience, or something like that. And so that's going to be an important question, because as we start looking at data and using data to answer questions, there are some things we're going to have to be aware of when we run Smaart, that we want to keep some things constant so that we're comparing apples to apples. So that's something that's going to come up throughout here. It's a good thing, a pointer to be aware of. Here's the basic system model. This is about as simple as it gets. I come back in because anybody who's ever done a class with me knows that I'm waving my hands all the time. But basically, this is the simple way we're looking at our systems. Is I have a system. I put a signal in, I get a signal out, and so that lends it to a bunch of different questions we can ask. Now that system could be as simple as it's a cable that my signal is passing through. Or it could be as complex as it is some multi-channels, environmentally diverse sound system made up of many, many different elements. And so we put a signal in, and we're summing it up at an output point at a seat somewhere in the room. But in its essence, we're asking two questions here. What is that signal? And what is that signal? And then what is the system doing to the signal passing through it? So this brings us to my inability to control this. I will get better at that, I swear to you. I can't get worse, I don't think. But it gives us two basic types of measurements that we're going to take. There's single channel measurements and dual channel measurements. A single channel measurement is absolutely, it's signal analysis. It's just saying, what is that signal? What is that frequency? How loud is it? When you're looking at a meter bridge, you're seeing what's the signal level there, what's the signal level there, a clip light saying the signal's too loud up there. These are monitoring the signal. When we look at an RTA, it's going to tell us about what is the frequency content right there. Whereas a dual channel measurement is a system analysis measurement. It's a relative measurement. So it's the way we're going to get that. We want to determine the response of the system, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to grab the signal going in. This is the whole class right here. You guys know this. Grab the signal going in, grab the signal coming out, compare them. Whole class is done. Really, I thought it was going to be 3 weeks. I know. It actually ended up being 15 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, so what we've got here is we get the signal going in, signal coming out, and then we're going to compare them and see how the system was affected. So this is not a question of how much 1 kilohertz energy is coming out of the system. It's a question of how much of 1K is coming out relative to how much I put into it. So what is the system doing to the signal passing through it? With that type of measurement, we can then look at what my system is doing and hopefully be able to maybe adjust the system to make it do what we want it to do. That's at least the hope here. All right, so just bringing time domain, frequency domain, dual channel, and single channel all together, this is what I call the Foursquare. But this is something that's going to be our whole lives for the rest of this class. Is on the top row, we've got single channel measurements, so signal analysis. We've got the waveform, we run it through an FFT, we get the spectrum, we run it backwards with an IFT, we get the waveform. There are places in Smaart where we actually do that all the time. Then if we compare the input to the output, we have the frequency response, so the lower quarter right down here. This is the frequency response. It's giving us an idea of the response in magnitude, in time, and phase. So that we got the magnitude response below, the phase response up above. But this, what this is telling us is the response of the system by frequency. If we take that data and we run it through an IFT, we get the time response, the impulse response of the system. Again, this is a really powerful concept, guys, because the thing is that it's just two views of the same information. And so one of the things we've done since version 7 is whenever we calculate the frequency response of the system, we also calculate the impulse response. So you can see them both because they're both giving you very useful information. And you never know which piece of information is going to be most important to you. But we're going to get back to this guy a few times. This one is going to come back and haunt us. And so it's one of those slides that I end up pulling up all the time. Okay, so that's going to be our system. All right, so Smaart is a tool. Okay, so system measurement, acoustic analysis, real-time tool. Yeah, that's where it comes from. It says it was almost called CQuack, I believe, when they were Sam and Thorny and everybody was naming it way back in 1995 when some of you guys weren't alive. Yeah. Okay, so Smaart is a tool. That's how we're approaching it. That's a fundamental concept here. It is not like I said, a school of kung fu. It is not a method of tuning a sound system. Tuning a sound system or doing sound engineering is making a series of decisions. This is a tool that's going to help us make those decisions, but it doesn't make the decision. All right, so this is the colder, boring part, but this is the informational part. But let's just talk about Smaart as a program. And one of the most important things to start off with is, just getting it running. That is absolutely critical. We have 3 people at this Rational Acoustics have dedicated multi-years of their life to licensing support. If you're having a problem with licensing, just send an email to support@rationalacoustics.com. And now Casey is on the front line, so he'll get up there and try and answer your question. Or Liz has been doing it for years. A lot of you have run into her. We're not going to go into loading the software. There's some great videos at rationalacoustics.com in the support section. There's lots of good videos in there that will take you through the problems. Please, before you update your operating system or you make a move with the software, please read what's in the knowledge base there. We've now got in Macworld, Catalina has come out, and Catalina is not supporting the 32-bit graphics. Basically, don't update if you want version 7 still to run on your computer. There's a much better treatment of that statement, but you should be aware of that. With our licensing system, Smaart allows you to be able to move installs from computer to computer. I would probably suggest that you don't just do that on a daily basis because sooner or later something's going to mess up. Also, probably don't leave your computer to auto update its operating system. You're kind of asking for problems there. But this is where you go. Support@rationalacoustics.com. They're fantastic about the support. So get to know Liz and Casey if you need to, or Johnny if you have to. Okay, so then what I'm saying, we're using 8.4 for these sessions. Let's open up Smaart for just a second here. I'll bring up the interface. And just a couple things. So I've got some spectrums going on here, but the thing I want to call your attention to is the file menu. And in the file menu, at the top of the file menu is About. And so pull up the information so it'll tell you what version you're running. So for this class, we're running 8.4.3.2, or I'm running the .2. The last number is either a .1, meaning a PC version, or .2, which is a Mac version. There is no difference between these versions. We don't do one thing on PC and the other, and a different thing on Mac. The only thing that's different between PC and Mac versions is just that in the PC version, the menu bar at the top lives with the application window, whereas in the Mac, it holds the top of the screen. Besides that, they're the same. We wouldn't do that to either of you. We hate all operating systems equally. But the major release is 8. So you know that if you buy version 8, you get all numbered dot releases after the fact. And it's probably a very good idea to always be current, because as bugs come up, we've built this house on sort of shifting sands. With software, the operating systems change, and sometimes that breaks things. And so if you're having a problem, go and see if there's a new version out and update. So the second number, the .4, is just the major release, and we're on .4 right now. Probably in another few months we'll be out with .5, and so that's it. You know, those are always fun because they always bring a whole bunch of new features and cool stuff. The next dot represents incremental and bug fixes and things like that, and generally that's what you want to keep up on for known bugs. And if you run into a bug, there are undocumented features in the software, some that we don't want. So if you run into a bug, see if you can reproduce it. And if you can reproduce it, try write down how you reproduce it. Because if you can send that in to Liz and Casey and Johnny and the support people, if you can send that in and detail how you did it, then they can recreate it and tell them what operating system you were working on. Because we run on everything from, I don't know, Snow Badger and Mac OS, I think 10.6.1 or whatever, and XP Service Pack 3. They're probably online right now correcting what I said, because I might be lying about that right now. But we run on a lot of different versions of the operating systems of both the PC and the Mac. And so please tell us the operating system, the version of the software, and also update your software to the current version. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. This is where you can deactivate the installation. Please don't touch that button. Okay, and then also in the file menu, you'll see that this came out with 8.2, I think. I don't remember the exact release, but check for updates. So you can just have Smaart, if you're connected to the internet, you can have it check for updates. And if you are on the internet, it will actually, when you boot up, it'll go out there and let you know if there is a new version. It's just trying to keep you up to date. Okay, so we'll jump back over to PowerPoint. Already in progress. Here we go. We're back to PowerPoint. So we're at 8.4 for these sessions. If you're using earlier versions, I mean, the whole point of being up to the current version is because there's some really cool new features that come out there. And one of the greatest things about this platform is that the ideas and the interface, the interface is all about connecting the measurement engines to the user. And so we've been very, very open. The whole process of Smaart has been continually listening to our users. If you have a great suggestion, send it to support@rationalacoustics.com. It's actually Chris's job to write all these things down, no matter how bat crazy they are. But we note them. They're not going to happen right away. It takes some typing to make these things happen. But we're listening to our users, because this is all about, you're the analyzer. You're the one making decisions. And so the whole idea of the interface is about connecting the measurement and the data to you so that you can make decisions. So it's always good to make use of the hive mind in development by being up with the current the current version. Anyway, so we're on 8.4. You use the expert files. You guys who have taken the class with me, you know what I'm talking about here. I'll tell you what the expert files is. And I swear to you, one day I might get this gift. I want this menu right here, the help menu. I want to call that the expert menu, because no sound engineer asks for help, but every single one of them is an expert. So I figure if we call this the expert files, everybody would be all over this. There's a ton of information in the help files. This is one of those things, when you have a question, before you jump on the phone, we gave you the phone number, you jump on the emails or something like that. Check this out. We have a manual, a digital version of the manual. You can buy a hard copy of the manual. You got the help files. There's 180 pages of helpful stuff all searchable. So you can go over here and search for whatever question you're asking. This is more about the functionality and where stuff is, in that you can always go and read your end user licensing agreement. That's what you agree to when you install your software. You've got the release notes. So every time a release comes out, there's a list of what went on in that release. So you can see what was fixed and what was, I mean, I told you, we're always in development. Then we come down to the bottom. We're going to be talking about this in just a second, but things like keyboard shortcuts. So the hotkeys and things like that are listed in here as well. So every major release, 8.4, 8.2, 8.3, when those major releases come out, the help files are updated. So they're going to be current and up to date. Okay. So use the expert files, man. That is not weakness. That is strength to be able to use the information that's given you. It's a sad thing when somebody calls up for help and they ask a question that is available, answered in the manual or in the help files, because then there's this sad moment as the person on the other end of the phone just reads off the files to you. It's sort of shaming. So please, we do a lot of work to get that information out for you guys. So please use it. It's there. It's at your fingertips. So use the expert files. And then the last thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about the Smaart V8 folder. One of the great things about the program is that you are not really required to be outside the environment. You don't have to interface. You don't have to interact with your operating system or anything like that, really. But there are a bunch of files and a bunch of things that Smaart is using. So I want to introduce you to this folder that's in your Documents folder. It's my Smaart V8 folder, and I had that guy out right here. So it's in your Documents folder. And the Smaart V8 folder has got a bunch of stuff in there. Like I said, you don't normally have to dive in there, but I want to tell you what's in there in this folder. So right away, you see at the very top, the first two folders are configs and beta config. Here's a cool thing, is that what we've figured out a long time ago is you never know who's a good beta tester. And so really, if you are a full license owner, you can go into your license account, and we actually publish the beta software that we're working on. And so you can install that on the computer, and you can play with it, and you can send us comments and anything. So go ahead and you can download it, and it keeps a separate configuration because obviously it has features that are not in the normal version. But that's where you see that there's the beta config is separate from the normal config. In here, we're going to talk about configs in just a second, but this is where they're stored. If I do these snapshots of how Smaart is configured, this is where they're stored. Now, if you get some weirdness going on, like a ghost in the machine, where the software it just doesn't, it's not working right. Sometimes what you want to do is just trash your configuration, this Smaart and Smaart config, these last two files there, just throw it away and restart Smaart, and it will create those new, fresh and new. So that's the config files. No, right now, sharing config files is not a very effective thing. They're very computer specific. And so giving somebody your config, I almost sound like this is a CDC message, but just with the config files, they're not really set up for you to give somebody else the configuration. The next folder down is impulse response. There is where impulse response data is stored. We store impulse response data as WAV files. License.txt is just happens to be when you do your install, it will write down what the license you use to install it. That's there for your information. Smaart uses it in the licensing. If that goes away, you're not ruined, but it's just a helpful thing. We've got the logs files. There's different things in Smaart that create logs, particularly SPL. If you're interested in SPL, we will get to it. Probably that will be next week or the week after that Chris will touch on. But also some great things. Michael has already done a really great series of the SPL, what's going on with SPL. So that data is up there right now for you to go and take a look at. The mics and skins, they're just files that are used, and target curves. They're just files that Smaart uses for certain features. The important thing is this tracers file. This tracers file is actually, that's the landing spot. When you capture data, that's where it gets written. And so by default, Smaart is pointed at this tracers folder in your Smaart V8 folder. Unless you have a good reason, don't do otherwise. Just keep Smaart putting its data there. But inside that folder, when we capture data, it's going to write the files to that file. So this is Spectrum data, so it's stored as a .srf file. And so you'll see this file structure when I open up. Well, you can see it. You can see it over here. You can see that session data right here has got 16K pink noise, and you can see those files there. So that's what you're looking at in the data bar that we're just about to talk about, is these folders right here. And so that's where your data lives. So I just wanted to talk about kind of the file structure behind Smaart. Like I said, generally you don't have to interact with it. I like that. I like not having to go in and interact with my operating system, because my operating system doesn't actually like me. And so I'll go back for just a second. Come here. There we go. All right, so let's talk about the GUI. Let's do a little tour of the GUI. I tell you what, I'm going to do more of this on the analyzer, but I wanted to put this in the PowerPoint so that when you guys afterwards, you could go back and look at this as well. But the way the GUI is laid out, and the GUI means graphic user interface, is that on the top you've got the tab bar and the menus bar. So the menus bar is for calling up commands and navigating some stuff. The tab bar, our interface, the Smaart setups are organized by tabs. So it's just like a browser window. So we have different tab setups. The tabs contain the measurements and the layouts of the screen. So you can, on the tab bar, you can switch between tabs that are configured. Then we have the control bar. The control bar is basically where you drive the program from in terms of measurement settings and what engines are running and things like that. There's where you'll see the measurement engines that you'll be running. Down below is the command bar. The command bar is a user-definable bar of 10 buttons that you can assign to any hotkeys. And so it's just a useful little bar. We start you off with some settings, but you can go in there and you can configure it. And then on the left-hand side of the plot is the data bar. So you're looking at the data window. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that the data bar, you see how it says transfer function at the top of it, and on the control bar, it says transfer function at the top. We have a transfer function control bar and data bar, and we have a spectrum control bar and data bar. We can't show both of them at the same time. So we'll talk about how do we control which command bar and data bar are out, control bar and data bar. Command bar, he stays the same. And so we'll talk about that as we go, but just wanted to point out that the different guys. And then the most important area, and the way that the interface is set up, it will also help allow you to maximize this area, is the plot area. In the plot area, that's where we're going to be looking at data. One of the critical factors in driving Smaart is all about how you're grouping and showing the data and what you're looking at what time, and whether you're looking at stored data or live data. So that takes place in here, and we'll be talking about that, and views and layouts of those data windows. So cool. So let's talk about a few things here. Let's talk about navigation in Smaart. There are three basic ways to control and navigate through Smaart. That's with the GUI, that's just hitting the buttons on the screen. It's with the menus. So with the GUI, there's buttons on the screen that will trigger different things or will navigate you places. And so we're going to learn all about those buttons on the GUI. we try very hard to simplify the GUI as much as possible. So even though you're looking at the layout here and you go, man, that is super complex, that's pretty simple. We're burying a lot of controls there and trying to minimize the amount of stuff we're sticking in your face because you're the analyzer. And so if we put every control that's available to you on the screen at the same time, it's going to be so confusing that it's not going to be usable. So we look at that usability with the GUI is being able to, if that control is on the top level of the GUI, it probably means that that's something you use on a regular basis. And then the other way we can drive it is through the menus, the drop-down menus, and those are grouped pretty intuitively. Configuration ends up being in the configuration menu. View menu, what's showing on the screen when the plots, it's in the view menu. So hopefully the menus are intuitive, but you can drive the whole program from controls in there. And then the third way is by hotkey, which are single keystroke commands that will trigger different functionality. Now here's the thing, is that generally there's 3 ways to get everywhere or more, so that there's maybe a GUI button, there's also, you can get to something through the menus or through or from a hotkey. So if I come over here and I'll bring this guy up, let's say that I want to get to measurement configuration. Well, under config, I can go to measurement config. You'll notice that right here on the side of the menu, it's got, those are keystrokes. So that is Option G is the hotkey to trigger that command. And there's actually a button here as well, this hammer and wrench. And again, I'm not sure where a hammer gets involved in the audio process, but some of you guys probably know. But there's a hammer and wrench. If you hit that little guy right there, that will take you to that same configuration window. And so 3 different ways to get to the same place. And so you're going to figure out the ways of getting where you need to go. And sometimes it's going to be hotkeys, sometimes it's just going to be buttons on the screen. But there's generally multiple ways of getting where you're going here with Smaart. Okay, so then we've got so this is just a note. You're going to hear me say this over and over again. Smaart is a tool, you're the analyzer. So a significant part of Smaart is dedicated to moving the data around and manipulating how you show the data and how you group it and moving things around on the screen and putting this live data in this window or having stored data versus live data. Because you're the analyzer, and so you're trying to make decisions, and so there's a lot of stuff with using the analyzer and really manipulating it that's about learning how to move data around. You can very easily have stuff going on in the analyzer that's not showing on the screen. I could have measurements that are actively running, but I'm looking at a completely different measurement at the time. I could have hidden data, and so a lot of what we're going to be doing in this operator fundamentals is just learning how to manipulate Smaart. And it is a very, very flexible program. We've got multiple windows. We can, if you get really crazy, you can be running multiple sessions of Smaart simultaneously across multiple computers. So anyway, we're gonna end up going there. We're gonna try and keep it simple, but the tool is built to allow you to fit it to your process. So Smaart isn't just used by one type of person. We've got system engineers out there. We've got studio engineers. There are copies of Smaart in the Pacific Northwest that are being used to trigger welding machines, a completely different application of it. So the thing is that everybody has a different application. So Smaart is highly configurable. This is one of the strongest things about it, is it's highly configurable. One of the biggest liabilities is it's highly configurable. I mean, it's a two-edged sword. But what we want to do is we want to get our head around how to configure Smaart and control it and get it to show us what we want. And then one of the things that we want to be aware of is focus, because we're going to be sending commands into Smaart. Smaart, I know that most of you, if not every one of you, has used a browser. When you have multiple windows open in a browser, you can be sitting there and you think that you're typing into one window and you're actually typing into a different window. That is directly analogous to what we're doing. We can have multiple windows. We can have modeless windows, meaning windows that stay open and are active even while the other windows are open. There are other windows that we have that are not modeless. Things like some of our option dialogues, the dialogues that we use for configuring Smaart, that you open it up and you forget you had it open, so you go to interact with the program and nothing's happening. You'll do this all the time. And you're like, why isn't Smaart responding? And you realize you still have a window that you haven't closed yet. So, but a lot of things, we're going to be sending commands into Smaart, and we try and be good about not using the same command to do multiple things. That's sort of like Calvert's rule was one of the first things in interface design that he was saying is don't use the same control to be two different things. And that's actually, we try and behave when we're building control. We try and make things as intuitive as possible. So the thing is, though, that you want to be aware of what has focus. And what hopefully I will be teaching you throughout this course is ways of operating that forces focus, so that you don't have to play this game and going, oh, what window, what measurement has focus? You can go, I want that window, that measurement to have focus. I want to capture that data. If you do that more proactive, direct approach, then you're not going to have to play so much of this game of what did I just tell the program to do? We use up a lot of hotkeys. Don't have your cat get up on your keyboard and put their paws or his paws across the keyboard, because who knows what state Smaart will end up in. We use a lot of hotkeys. So one of the things that I want to do in this course as well is talk about when I get wiped out or I get sent someplace, how do I get back? What is the Mr. Wizard take me home type of things? This is absolutely critical for us, is how can we configure fast and how can we get ourselves back when something's gone weird. Okay, so we'll talk about the architecture of this program. So I think I'm on an hour and 15 pace to finish this. So let's see if I can do this whole session in an hour and 15 minutes. So think of the program, Smaart as a program built of smaller programs. So that there's one program in Smaart, and it's actually kind of the first guy that starts running is the data acquisition. Its job is to acquire signals. Then we got our measurement engines. Little asterisk there on engines is just that, just to define the term. When I say engines, the reason why we call them engines is that when I started doing this type of work, what we had doing the computations and running the FFTs were actually DSP engine cards that slotted into a computer. So they were actually done by physical cards or engines. When we say engines here, it's just a computational engine. It's a block of code, but the terminology remains. So when we say a measurement engine, it's its own little block of code. Its job is to take in signals and spit out data. Then we've got the GUI. The GUI is the interface that you're looking at in Smaart, and that's the controls, and that's how you're telling the program what to do and configuring it and telling engines to run. What's interesting is the block next to it, it says API, is that Smaart has been built so that it can be controlled from within the program, but it can also be controlled and interact outside the program through an API. API means Application Program Interface. And so the API, many third-party manufacturers use the API to control Smaart and to pull data out of Smaart and into their control environments. We also we use the API ourselves in order to have any copy of version 8 can act as a host to any other copy of version 8. So they want to be the same version, just let you know that. But one copy, one install of Smaart can remote to another copy of Smaart. It's used for people using tablet computers where you're at a job site where you have one computer at the front of house position or in the main control room or something connected up to the signals, but you have another tablet where you're wandering around, so you're getting your data remotely, and you're just controlling that other computer. Then we've got our data plots. Our data plots here are just how we show our information. And so we're going to spend a bunch of time on those data plots, how we look at live data, how we look at, we have our data registers where we have stored static data, and we can look at those in the plots. So anyway, we're going to spend a bunch of time on that. That's going to begin with Wednesday's session coming up. So we'll go on from there, but that's the basic structure here. So when you start up Smaart, so like I said, let's start from the very beginning. So when you run Smaart, you're in one of two conditions. You're either on first run or subsequent run. First run is just Smaart hasn't been run yet. Now, if you first run is just the very first time you run it, or if you've restored the defaults. If you restore defaults, which you can do from the control, if you restore the defaults, the measurement configuration manager, I'll show you that in just a second. But on first run, we're restoring defaults, or this is what I was trying to remember, the demo. So a lot of you guys are going to be running the demo version for going through this course and playing with stuff. You can get the demo version of Smaart from rationalacoustics.com. The demo version of Smaart is limited in a couple ways. One of them is that every time you run it, it doesn't remember its configuration, and so it's like the very first time you've run it. It's like Frosty the Snowman when they rebuild him. Happy birthday! But anyway, when you start up the demo version, it's first run, and so you're given this message: "Hey, Smaart has no measurements configured. Let's go build some measurements." Whereas in all subsequent runs, when you start up Smaart, you're given three choices. The first is just to continue as configured. So Smaart continually updates its configuration, that configuration file that I showed you. It's always marking down how it's set up so that if you happen to crash out of the program when you come back or when you restart, it remembers how it was configured. And so if you want to just always boot back into it, there's a little do not show this message again, so you can check that box. Or your second choice there is to create a new configuration. Okay, so the way the program is set up, you've got a measurement configuration. The measurement configuration has the way your I/O devices, the measurement engines you've configured, the spectrum and transfer function engines, the tabs that you've built, the windows that you've built. That measurement configuration is part of that core configuration. However, there are other things that you're configuring as well. Things like just options about the colors of the plot and different graphing options and all sorts of different things that are just generally about the program's operation itself. With those options, those are part of the greater program configuration, which I believe is the next slide. Yeah. So that what this will allow you to do is to dump the measurement configuration, but keep your program configuration. And then the last thing is they will allow you to select a previously stored configuration. So talking about those configurations, in the Manage Configurations, which is in the Config menu, if you go into Manage Configurations, now you can't do this if you're in the demo version, but in the full version, you can save your current status, your current setup, your current configuration. You can save a snapshot that you can then recall later. Keep in mind, data is not part of a configuration. Data is in that folder. What is part of the configuration is what folder Smaart is looking at. But in general, once you save data, even if you restore defaults, you don't lose that data. Okay, and so you have your configuration management where you can come and you can recall old ones. This is also where you can restore defaults. When you hit restore defaults, which we'll probably do during this course, I know we're going to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to hit restore defaults, and Smaart will say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" You go, "Yeah, I'm sure I want to do this." And so you hit that button, and Smaart will reboot back to like it was first run. And so as soon as it boots up, it's going to say, "Hey, let's go get some measurement signals." So then we've got, like I was saying, about two different types of configurations. You've got the measurement configuration and then the program configuration. The whole program configuration contains the measurement configuration as a subset of it. so that what was the stored configurations are the entire program configuration with the measurement configuration. Hopefully that made sense. We're going to create a few in this class, so hopefully we'll get to it. So when you hit startup in Smaart, so when that beautiful splash screen comes up, I call this one the Road to Ruin. Anybody who's with us in version 7, I called it the Fireball of Fury, but it's just the splash screen comes up. What's going on is that Smaart is talking to your operating system and saying, hey, what devices do you have connected? Who can I talk to? Smaart can talk to anything with a Wave, Core Audio, WDM, or ASIO driver, which basically is almost any computer I/O device. And so what it does is Smaart talks to the operating system talks to your I/O device. So in the order of battle here is you want to connect your I/O device to your system, make sure it has the right drivers for that operating system. We don't care if it's connected by Firewire, Ethernet, horse and buggy. I don't care how it's connected. It's just that device needs to be able to see your operating system, or your operating system needs to see that device with one of those drivers, and Smaart will almost definitely be able to talk with it. If you're having a problem with that, support at rationalacoustics.com. Okay, so when you start up Smaart, it goes through, it figures out what devices are there, and where it can see signals. So if you're not seeing a device, I would make sure that it was connected when you initially booted up Smaart. Okay, so we're going to talk about the configurator. I'm going to go into the configurator and show you that directly. And so I'm going to walk you through what's effectively in those slides right there. The last thing I want to pull up here is the system that we're connected to. So this is what I call our SOFO system. This is what we're going to be using for the class, and it's a really simple system. We've got a mixer. I'll have an iPod plugged into it. I'll have Smaart plugged into it. But basically, the mixer's job is to create whatever the show is, the signal is. I don't care. Then the output of the mixer drives into the DSP. The DSP is just there for manipulating the response of the system. The output of the DSP drives the amp and speaker. And then we have a microphone, and later on we might have multiple microphones in the environment to be able to measure what's happening in the acoustic response. So I've got basically the signals that we're going to be looking at here is I'm going to grab the signal when it comes out of the mixer. I'm going to bring that into my I/O. I'm going to grab the signal when it comes out of the DSP. So I've got mix out, I've got DSP out, I've got the microphone signal. And then one other signal I'm going to grab is I'm going to grab the signal generator. I'm going to take Smaart's, has a generator built in, and I'm sending that into the mixer to use it for measurements. But I'm also going to loop it back into Smaart. So what we're going to see with dual channel measurements is it's all going to be about your goes into signal and your comes out of signal, the reference signal and the measurement signal. And so what we're going to be in doing our system measurements, it's going to be defined by which signal is the goes into signal and what's the comes out of signal. And so if this is my reference and this is my measurement, what I'm measuring is in this loop. If this is my reference, and this is my measurement, then I'm measuring this guy. And so when we get into transfer function, it's just going to be important to know what's in our measurement loop. Now, for people at home, if you want to be able to set up and duplicate these measurements, this is the basic setup we've got. Nothing too crazy. Even the quality of the gear doesn't have to be particularly fantabulous. It's just going to allow us to do a bunch of different measurements here. Okay, so I'm going to jump off into Smaart for a second, and let's talk about configuration. And I'm feeling that we potentially are going to get this done at 3:15. So I'm feeling good about myself, or as good as I can get. I'm blowing my voice out. Okay, I'm just sitting here complaining. Oh, the kids these days. All right. So under config, there's IO config. So the first part of the configurator, and yes, it's called the configurator. The first screen on it is the IO config. And so at the top of it, you'll see when Smaart started up, it's going to go through and check all the drivers you have loaded, and it's going to say, these are the devices I can get signals from. And so what we're going to do is we're going to choose that device. I happen to be using Dante Virtual Sound Card to talk to the system that I'm measuring. So basically, sound card, the actual device is a Yamaha TO 1608. Or no, it's a Rio, sorry. But it's a set of preamps, 16 in, 8 out preamps. So I've chosen the Dante Virtual Sound Card. So as soon as you click on a device, it will enumerate the output channels. So my Virtual Sound Card actually has 16 channels that are coming in. What's really kind of cool about this is as soon as I select this, it's going to select the first 8 channels, assuming that you're going to want to use the first 8 channels. That's just a guess. We're just trying to help things move along quickly. And so in this case, I happen to be only using input 1 is my vocal mic. That's what you guys are listening to right there. Input 2 is what we call mic 1. It's the actual measurement mic that we're going to be using. So that would be the mic in that drawing. Input 3 and input 4 we're going to save for later. In that case, we might do some multi-mic stuff later on today, or not today, couple weeks. But in later sessions, we might get into multi-mics. We definitely will, either in or out of the SOFO sessions. Input number 5 is the DSP out. So we've split the output of the DSP signal, and he's showing up into input 5. Input 6 is the generator direct. That's the loop back from my generator. And input 8 is the mix out of the console that we're looking at. And so those signals show up. You can see that I've got signals showing up. Those are the only signal channels there. And then in my device, I've got the ability to name my input channels, and I would highly recommend this. You don't have to. You can go with whatever the default names, like down here in input 9, its creatively assigned name is input 9. But generally what we want to do is we want to name the signals that we're using. It'll help us keep on top of the measurements that we've configured. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to call the input 1 Vox mic, input 2 mic 1. Now, interesting thing about this is as soon as I go into I choose the friendly name, like the friendly name here or the friendly name here, and I select the full name. When I go in, and this is going to be true for any data you enter into Smaart. So any place in Smaart where you're typing in data someplace. So let's say I want to call this guy Mike 1. So it wants to be a more formal name, Mike 1. Now, I've just typed in new information in there. If I just tab into the next field, Smaart's not going to know to keep that data. And so anytime you type in something new, before you tab out of that field, just hit enter. What's kind of cool about this is if I come in here and I call this guy Mike 2 right down here and I hit enter in it, Smaart jumps you down to the next field. So Smaart's trying to get you moving as quickly as possible. So when you come in and you start naming your input channels, you can just go to the first channel, type in a name. When you hit enter, it jumps you down to the next channel, ready to name that channel. So there's a lot of stuff in Smaart that we try to turbocharge the configuration process. Naming your channels will be a helpful thing later on because it will help you catch problems if you were setting up measurements and you got the wrong signals. So we'll get more into this because we're going to be building measurement configurations throughout the whole process. And so we're going to go in. We want to connect to our device before we boot up Smaart. We boot up Smaart, find the device, give that device the names. Now, it's going to remember those names until you go and change them otherwise. Now, Smaart's not going to recognize specific devices. So if you happen to have 2 octacaptures or 2 Focusrite Sapphires, Smaart won't know the difference between the two. So when you plug them in, they're not necessarily going to enumerate in your setup. So we're going to keep it simple though. We're only using one device. We're using a Dante virtual sound card. So we'll leave those names there. Now, one of the cool things that happened though is I went through and I named my input signals. I verified that I had signals on my inputs. What's really cool is that Smaart went ahead and went into the measurement config, and for every signal that I chose to name and to use, it also created a spectrum measurement engine. A spectrum measurement engine's job is to take an input signal, run FFTs, and give you the spectrum of that input. And so you'll see the definition. So Vox mic is named, it's the Vox mic signal off the Dante virtual sound card. Mic 1 is mic 1 off the Dante. So the names, its name is exactly the same as the channel that it was set to. And so Smaart goes ahead and creates that, and then what you see here is those names show up. Here are my measurement engines showing up in the window. Okay, so now you can see we've got our signals. What we're going to get into next time is we're going to get into looking at those signals. We're going to get into spectrum measurements, and we'll go through with some more setup things. But basically, this is what I wanted to get done in the first day. So we're gonna move over. I'll bring Michael out here because this is something that I know that stuff has been going on. That people have been talking. Did everybody leave halfway through? I can't tell. All I got is Joshua's. So Joshua's been loving. He's giving me a standing O.
The only people that left were the Russian bots, so everyone's still here.
I paid good money for the Russian bots, man.
We do have a couple of questions, though. If you want, I can fire them at you.
Yeah, that would be cool.
So Garrett wants to know: do you consider an RTA spectrum measurement to be a good single-channel tool?
Hell yeah, absolutely. I mean, but it's okay. So a spectrum measurement, for all of this stuff, you have to know what question you're asking. So is my question, what frequency is that, right? Or is it, what's the difference in level between this guy and that guy? So we're going to get deeper into it as we go, but you really need to be aware of what questions you're asking, because one of the first ways I learned to tune a sound system was actually with pink noise and an RTA, and we'll touch on that coming up. And it actually is effective in some ways, but it's also vulnerable in a lot of ways. And so that's what a lot of this class is about. But I have an RTA on my iPhone. I mean, you should have on your phone, you should have an RTA on there, because you just need to ask the question, what was that frequency, right? That's a question we have to answer as sound engineers all the time. It's going to be pretty good with that. It's going to be pretty damn accurate. Now, knowing its exact level, or one of the things we're going to get into in the next episode, next session, is going to be what's the difference in the level of this guy to this guy, and when we start banding energy, how accurately is it banding the energy and things like that. So in a lot of cases, just as a scratch pad device, it's going to be more than enough for what you want. And I really hate to be without an RTA on my phone now. I could just get kind of used to being able to pop that out. Do you think that's good?
I think it's great. The other question that a couple folks had was, how can they get their Smaart certification after they've taken this whole series?
What we're going to do, we're going to do a level 1. Now, the certification, please, I just want to be clear about this. What we're certifying is that you pass the operator certification, which is basically saying you know how the program works and you can set it up. We're not certifying somebody as a system engineer or a system tuner or anything like that. However, that all said, and you can tell I'm a bit of a beaten child, where I've had situations in the past where we've certified somebody and they've misrepresented what the certification is. So just bear with me on that. But We are a good percentage of the way through the vetting the test, and there's actually a bunch of people, I believe, that are still on this thread that are going to have to take the test. Our instructors are going to have to take the test before we put it out with the general populace. So I'm thinking before the last one of these SOFO sessions, we should have the test available for you to go online and do it, and take the test. Right now, we're trying to figure out if the test is going to cost any money. The service costs us money to have the test administered. We're not doing this as a profit center, but we're thinking, we always like to make T-shirts, and so we're thinking about, if you take the test, do you get a printed certificate and a T-shirt, and what else goes along with it. So we're thinking about that. In general, though, our inclination is just to make it a free test that you can take, and you can get your level 1 certification. So there's, it's always a work in progress. I'm going to take this layout, and I'm going to put Michael right in front of me in this layout, so I'm not looking over here. So that just helps square me up. I'm looking at Joshua now, and I'm looking at Michael. So that hopefully, it's something we've been working on for a long time. It's something we planned to have out years ago. What's really cool is that we have the time now. So, and Michael has been working on it. Chris has been working on it. Gavin. So I have a good feeling that we're going to be able to get this thing launched in the next week or so.
One suggestion is, why don't we just print the certificate directly onto the T-shirt? That might save some money.
We actually did that. We did a certificate of attendance. So we have certificates of attendance it was an old Smart class piece of swag. We love swag. We're all about swag. Swag makes the world go round. So, but we are getting there, and we definitely, before we conclude this, we want to have that test up there. The test, keep in mind, the test is going to be open book. It's not something that we want you, if we're asking you what the hotkey is to trigger something, you don't need to know. You just need to know where to go to answer the question. And please don't let it be call Rational Acoustics or email Liz or something like that. That's not the right answer. Go into the help files, the expert files, and get your question answered. Any other questions?
I think that's it. A couple of folks want to know, can they watch this later? Where can they find the next session? And the answer to both of those, in the description of this video, there is a link to a YouTube playlist where you can find all previous sessions, and you will find future sessions as they are scheduled.
I hope my voice is is on the upswing right now. Although, is it sexy raspy? I don't know.
Yeah, a little salt and pepper in the gravel, yeah.
All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to a screen here that's going to say this is the end. Thank you guys for sitting through this. It is something that we've been meaning to do for a long time. One of the great things about it is that this community, we also have a whole bunch of instructors that are showing up here. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to make their contact information available as well. So if you want in-language support, you'll know who to go to for this. We've got a lot of people out there that spend a lot of their time helping this platform grow. And so we want to make sure you have access to all of them. And I think that's about it. I could leave you with a picture of Joshua. And here we go. Do, do, do.